Good afternoon. I'm Amandeep Singh. I came on board Force10 as part of the acquisition of this company called Force10 Networks. Wanted to give you a quick glimpse of where we are, in terms of the Dell networking and what is the overall Dell idea in terms of where they're trying to go. You have seen this slide a couple of times. There are a couple of metrics, 77% in terms of the enterprise mobility priorities and stuff like that. And you would have drawn your own flavors in terms of how the industry is evolving. The bottom line, which I can assure you, whichever way you dissect the industry, you would come to one single conclusion. The industry is transforming at a rate which is unimaginable. Right? We have been in the industry for a couple of years now. We've seen it transform over generations, but this time is pretty unique because of the rate at which the change is happening. Now let's look at purely from the Dell networking domain and see what is changing and what are the enablers which are changing the things for us. The change is so fast, and it's coming from both the directions, right? You have a change happening from the way your data, your storage is all coming together, and there is a change happening in the way you connect to those elements together. So gone are the days where he said, I have a laptop, I have a desktop, and that's the only way for me to connect, right? Now, let's look at the data center side, right? You saw the transformation that's happening across the industry from the compute side, from the storage side, all coming together to form what we call the converged networks, right? It's about, how your servers interact with the storage networks to give you a orchestrated offering together. We're talking of flatter topologies. Now, that's pretty interesting, right? There was a time when all of us knew that the only way to make a network is to have a core, an aggregation layer and a distribution layer and a extended aggregation layer, and that was the only way to have networks. The entire recall for that kind of a philosophy was because we believed the data centers were not south traffic flows, which means you have a client and you have a physical server, and that's the only way a data flow happens, right? The moment you talk of the moment you talk of the orchestration environment today, you're talking of virtual machines. The virtual machines do reside on physical servers, but you cannot attribute in terms of which physical server they're lying upon. The traffic flows have gone, more of east-west profile, and that's what requires a network to have a large scale, and also requires them to have a flatter topologies. So, as I said, it's about the virtual machines, right? So the networks are, they understand and they do surely appreciate that there's a physical machine behind it, there's a physical connect behind it, but what really matters and what should really matter is the virtual machine, because the policies that you deploy on the network, the QoS you deploy, has to be for the virtual machine and not the physical asset you have. If you look at on the branch side, right, look at how far you can go and say how resistive we were as IT managers to wireless as a technology, right? I mean, it scares us to death. How do you control wireless? It's so difficult. Anybody can walk in and, we, as much as possible, I know for sure every one of us resisted that technology to be brought into our facilities. But look at the way we are today. You could do away with not having a Wi-Fi. What do you do about 3G? What do you do about LTE? What do you do about BWA? Right? This is something which is there to stay and will surely grow as business grows. And that's a big challenge because there are new mobility devices. I know a couple of people, couple of organizations which do not allow their employees to access specific websites, from the office parameters, right? So you cannot access Hotmail from the office or, blah, 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 Facebook from the office. Everyone has a mobile, right? So how do you control it? So, there's a very complex scenario in the way you would do those mathematics together. You heard about the VDI story, right? You heard about how things are transforming, in terms of what we believe is a desktop today. It's not a physical machine. It's an allocation of a certain profiled resource, a managed resource, which is sitting at a data center today. You just have a virtual access to that asset. That's the key difference that is happening today. So all of that, if you put the entire thing together, the only thing that glues both the sides together is the network. And because of the marked shift in the way all of these are evolving, you see that the network architectures required are completely different. Now let's look at what Dell networking is trying to do in this space. What you hear about this word, the Dell VNA, the virtual network, architecture, it's a framework. And what this framework basically does is that it basically tells you that it is about workloads. It is not about how a physical server connects to a physical storage through a physical asset of a network. It's about how the entire thing comes together to form a network services automated orchestrated asset for you. Because for you, what you care for is a workload, which is a virtual asset, not a physical asset, though might be running on a physical set of assets. So let me go slightly deeper. Let me tell you what do I mean by flatter networks and how do you basically optimize topologies, right? Now, as I said, date yourself. The only knowledge you would have about the networks is it has to be a three-layer architecture. That's the only way you grow larger networks together, right? You need to have a very strong core platform, high-performing core platform. You need to have an aggregation or distribution platform which does policing. You have access platforms which are basically dumb devices for access controls. Now, the reason why you had this philosophy was it has more enterprises in its outlook. The traffic profiles, as I said, are north-south. The capacity required for a network is defined by what capacity your servers can hold. So if you have a large client base and 20 servers each with a gig interface, your capacity for the entire network required depends on the capacities of the servers to process data, right? That is completely transformed. The other key thing is that the densities on those network infrastructures were not that enough that time that we could really condense those platforms into a flatter, wider topology which spans across. And that's something which is which Dell is trying to drive out of the platform and the portfolio that we have. So this is the first time you would get a glimpse of what I'm talking of in terms of physical attributes of Dell networking portfolio. So you see a portfolio which is the data center switching portfolio. You would see a portfolio which is the branch switching portfolio. Now the curious mind would ask, what's so different, right? I mean, the data center also requires a switch, right? The campus also requires a switch. 24 port, 48 port, gigs, 10 gigs, 40 gig flavors. What's so unique about it? The attributes of a switching platform required for a data center are completely different. Because the data center switching is about east-west traffic profiles. It is not about having a hardware which is line rate or wire speed. It is about having the capability to develop the entire infrastructure, the entire network which is line rate. That's number one. Number two is that the switching infrastructure has to have unique capabilities for today's upcoming technologies. Have you seen the impact of running a VM, a dense VM on a network? The moment you have a dense VM on a network, your standard campus environment switching start to collapse down. Why? Because a VM environment is an extremely dense environment and the traffic peaks a lot. If there is not adequate buffering capacity on your switches, you will see packet drops. And when you see packet drops, there is read transmission. And read transmission slows down your entire application performances. And that's a different, as I said, so from the physical attributes, it might look like a dumb 24, 48, blah, 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 gig, 10 gig platforms, but the attributes of how the equipment behaves are completely different from the data center switching to a campus switching environment. You heard of the mobility, right? So we have the mobility portfolio, specifically geared for the Wi-Fi kind of environment. And I'm sure as things scales, you will see a couple of interesting applications for it. Blades, right? So this is a very interesting portfolio which came up not with us but with a couple of other people when the compute and the networking technology started to merge. And today we have a very strong blade portfolio coming. You will see extremely powerful offerings coming in this space itself in the 10G and the 40G space, for the blade environment. So, is there something unique that we're talking of here, or am I just repeating myself with what you would have heard from other people? Just to give you framework, just a broad framework of what Dell networking is all about in terms of the differential that we're trying to bring. The first key thing that you would experience, when you get your first glimpse into Dell networking is that it's a very cost-effective and a massive fabric capacity sizes that I'm talking of. Traditionally, you would have seen of core switches, 2 terabyte, 2.5 terabyte capacities. Somebody would say I have a roadmap for 18, 20 terabyte, a couple of gig capacities. I'm sure you would have not heard of platforms 2U size giving you 128 ports of 10G. That's a different ballgame altogether. We're talking of a mammoth scale which is completely unheard of. A couple of people would come up and say, I have a power reduction of 10%, 15% with what the industry says. Nobody would come and say that I can give you, 1/10 the power consumption or, the chassis framework of, a magnitude difference at what you would have experienced about. So we're talking of a huge scale The reason we're talking scale is because the data center is about scale. The biggest challenge that any IT manager faces today when he runs a data center environment is not the equipment, not technology. It is things as simple as power, rack space, air conditioning. And those are the basic things that we are trying to go after as Dell networking portfolio, apart from having technology leadership in this specific space, right? If you look at the traditional access platforms or in the data center language, the top of rack platforms that we basically talk top of, right? And I mentioned that those devices are kind of unique, right, in terms of what they are capable to do, right? We have flavors which can do what we call the ultra low latency, right? People are forced to go for InfiniBand because of the latency parameters that InfiniBand basically offers to you. Imagine if I could give you InfiniBand kind of performances on standard Ethernet, 700 nanoseconds of latency. Or imagine if we could have, against a standard switching platform of, which has 8 MB or 20 MB of buffer, imagine for a dense environment if you could give you 1.25 GB of packet buffering. Imagine, my colleague just mentioned about the rendering scenario. That's a classic scenario. Extremely bursty traffic profiles. And that requires deep packet buffering. And that's the framework that we're basically trying to work. Now, when it comes to the virtual orchestration, every vendor has more or less a philosophy which is closely knit to one and only one orchestration framework. They will stick to VM, they will stick to KVM or Citrix. Nobody gives you the flexibility to say your business requirement is more to do with what a KVM can do. Or maybe your business have a requirement where VMware is the best possible orchestration environment. And with our portfolio, we are ensuring that you have that flexibility to decide which is the best orchestration environment for you to work with. Having said that, I would give you a glimpse of the physical attributes, the physical components that we have in the Dell networking portfolio. Everything is 100% industry standard, right? So I can stand here and say that tomorrow, if you do not like Dell components, throw us out. If you believe that tomorrow Dell networking is not able to deliver you the technology leadership that we're talking of today, throw us out. Because you have the flexibility to coexist a Dell networking with anything else because it's completely open standard. The interfaces are open standard. The command line that we use are industry standard command lines, which are very much Cisco iOS-like. So all of us have familiarity with the show and the enable disable command lines. The same thing will work on our framework as well. Having said that, don't mistake us to say that we have one single solution and we say, well, that's our data center offering. Let's go all about and just make the entire world black and white with that specific framework. Data centers are different. Data center is a generic word. Every data center is extremely different in terms of what functional attributes it provides. If you look at the snapshot of the Web 2.0, the Web 2.0 is about scale, density, performances. I can give you a quick metric. What is the size of a data center of Facebook? Each data center, 30,000 racks. 30,000 racks is the capacity of one single data center of Facebook. The server cluster that they talk of, and I'm sure you would have the same kind of clusters, each server cluster in Facebook is 160 or 130 racks. We're talking of mammoth scales, and that's what the Web 2.0 portals is about. If you look at a slightly different industry, which is the high performance, high frequency trading for that matter, or high performance computing, those are about latency. All they care for is latency. Every millisecond that we can drop in the latency brings more dollars to their pockets. So we have portfolios which are generic for the entire data centers. We have portfolios catering to a specific offering for a data center. And let me repeat again, every data center is different, and we have the right solutions for it. This is the first time you would see a glimpse of the entire data center components that we have to offer. The first thing, it's extremely laser sharp focus on the switching portfolio from the data center networking, extremely laser sharp. So we don't have any frills to say, well, I have a very high capacity platform switch, but I also have a software-based firewall to run over it, or I also have a software-based load balancer to run over it. That's not the game today the industry is into. The industry is into extremely specialized offering in the segment you choose to sit in, and we chose to sit in the high-performance networking segment for that matter. So if you're looking for converged platforms, When I say converged platforms, you heard about the iSCSI environment, right? Now, iSCSI is like an Ethernet interfacing environment which can coexist with the standard switching. We have platforms for it. Those platforms require ultra-low latencies, and we have those ultra-low latency certified boxes, which are part of our portfolio. Blade switching. So today you have gig, 10 gig flavors from Dell networking coming in as part of a Blade portfolio. And as we strengthen into our 12G server portfolio, you would start to see 40G interfacing coming in as a Blade offering, and a high capacity 10G coming in for layer 2, layer 3 in chassis switching, which is possible today. Extremely specialized top of rack or extremely specialized switching. You want deep packet buffering. When I say deep packet buffering, we're talking of 1.25 GB packet buffer in each switch. Why do you need that? Very dense VM environment, video rendering, even for storage interconnects. And it's not that 1.25 GB divided by the number of ports is what we're talking of. It's that you can allocate the buffers tunable to a specific port to say this part of my network has a large capacity of storage, and I needed this to work in a specific behavior, right? Low latency switching, right? Now, if you have an environment which requires aggregation platforms, chassis-based, standalone-based, gig, 10 gig, 40 gigs, we have the largest portfolio in that space as well. If you go back the history of the acquisition that Dell did, which is the Force10 Networks, you would understand that in the last 10, 11 years that this industry has been, we were the leaders in the chassis-based switching. The largest capacity chassis ever was from this set of company, right? So we are still the leader in terms of the chassis switching. And we have a couple of flavors, not one single chassis fitting every possible requirement, couple of flavors of chassis switches which are available. The biggest play that we have today is what we call the distributed chassis environment or a distributed core environment. Imagine the framework where, so typically you would come across people saying, I have a chassis which is 10 terabytes. Maximum I've heard is 18.5 terabyte switching capacity. The challenge is there is a technology limitation in terms of scaling a chassis beyond a specific terabyte space because of the heat dissipation required to manage that chassis. Even the 10 terabyte, the 8.5 terabyte chassis that you plug into data centers today requires specialized cooling. You just cannot plug in a dumb data center and say it will work. It just doesn't work. If you had the flexibility to structure your own chassis, right? So you could start your chassis platform from 1.5 terabytes and take it to 160 terabytes. I'm saying 160 terabytes with standard switching components, standard 10G, 40G components. That is what is the power that we are giving in hand of our customers, right? And as I said, you do not like Force10 or Dell networking components today. Tomorrow, if you believe that we are not up to the mark in terms of what the way industry is evolving, it can coexist. Today is an environment of coexist, right? It is just not possible to say whatever we had past is gone. Let's throw everything. Let's go to a beautiful new fabric, have completely greenfield, because that's just not possible. You will have to coexist. Every element that you have has to have an active role being played in the new framework that you're talking of, and Dell networking allows that framework to do. Okay? The best thing that I can stand here and say is that all of you are here because of Dell or for Dell. One of the strong components that I'm sure you would have experienced is Dell services. And every beautiful product that Dell has in the Dell networking portfolio, every beautiful product that we envisage in future in other portfolios has a very strong backing from Dell services. Post-sales, implementation, management, everything. Okay, I'm sure you would have come across this in all the the assessment that we had today, and that's a very strong offering from us. And let's not forget, it is not about Dell networking as an isolated component. Look at imagine the power you have in your hand as the consumer, as the IT manager. From Dell, you have the complete orchestrated offering. You want to buy compute, you want to buy storage, you want to buy networking, you want to buy orchestration software, you want to buy third-party peripherals and have everything in one single glue. It's possible. But none of that component forces you in a lock-in scenario. So if you buy Dell storage, you're not forced to buy a Dell networking. If you buy Dell compute, it doesn't force you to buy Dell storage. So which means you have the power to coexist a specific layer. You have the power to merge the entire portfolio into a specific layer and yet coexist. And none of it locks you down today or tomorrow. Yet it's one large framework that you have at any given point of time to offer. Couple of references, couple of wins that we have. All of them are data center wins. I'm sure audience here would not know that when you hear the names Twitter, you tweet a lot today. You all are tweeting today, right? You tweet, right? All of us use Facebook, Baidu, Zynga, Alibaba, Google, right? What runs them? It's Dell networking. Okay, so there has been enormous success that we have seen in the past in very large data center frameworks, and that's the framework which is available today through Dell networking. Okay, that's all from my side. Any questions you may have now, I'll be glad to take. I'll be around till the end of the day today, and you can catch hold of me. I have a couple of colleagues here as well who can answer your question. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much, and you have a good day ahead.